Here are some tips for selecting, cutting, and lighting the perfect cigar for you. Cigars are very complex things. They can have as many as 10 different tobaccos making up each cigar, from the filler to the binder through to the wrapper. Those are the three main components that blenders use to actually create the cigar. The wrapper is the leaf you see on the outside. When selecting a cigar, you want to quickly examine it for any tears, holes, spots that don't look evenly colored, caps that aren't applied correctly or might be lifting up, seams that are cracking or splitting. You want to look for any cracks if it has a band around the band point itself. You can see this one here has a pretty prominent vein running down the wrapper leaf, but the seams look good. Very tight, you can't even feel it, you can barely see it just from the color difference. It's very smooth. You can quickly roll it around in your fingers to feel if it has any soft spots. You don't need to put a lot of pressure on it. Remember, if you're doing this in the store and this is still in the cello, be gentle. If you don't buy this, someone else will. But just give it a once over. If it looks good, it's good to go. You don't need to get the absolute best one in the box. It doesn't make a difference. Now the structure of the cigar, I'm going to go ahead and open this one up. Obviously, don't do this at home. I'm cutting complete cap off. I'm actually going to, that's a little too big for my cutter, but what I'll do here is I'll start taking it apart. The wrapper leaf is one continuous leaf that's spiraled down the cigar, and this is on here to look pretty. It has its own characteristics as far as the flavors and the burn properties, but it's primarily there to look pretty. You can see it's a cutout of one leaf. This is approximately half of the leaf, and then it's shaped by hand so that you can spiral it around and actually create the cigar. Now underneath it is a very similar leaf. This is called the binder, and as you can see, not as pretty, but it's on exactly the same way. It's simply on a spiral. Let me find the start here. Here we go. It's actually spiraled the other way so they stay wrapped a little bit better. And this again, just like the wrapper leaf, has its own characteristics. These are often two completely different tobaccos. Now inside the filler here, which is a core, these are not spiraled around. These are actually bunched like this. You'll have a whole leaf. You curl it up and you make it into a tube. You take the next leaf and you curl it into a tube, and you lay them in your hand like that, and you bunch a whole bunch of these together and you put it in a machine that specially rolls them up, and you get this. This is the filler, and this is how each center of a cigar is constructed. And this, you just kind of have to unroll. These do not come apart cleanly because they are bunched just like I showed you. And inside the filler, like I said, you can have as many as 8 or 10 different tobaccos in here. You don't have to use whole leaves. They use partial leaves. It's the specific recipe to create this cigar that the blender came up with. They're all different. So this is why you can't make general statements about cigars, about country of origin, like, oh, all cigars from Nicaragua have this kind of flavor. That's just talking about one variable in making this cigar. You can't even say, oh, well, it's a Connecticut, so it's going to have this particular flavor and this particular strength. That's only talking about one wrapper. It's one variable in all of this. So obviously in the filler here, you can't see everything that's in here, but I can tell from the shades of the tobaccos that are in here, there are multiple. Here's 2 right here. There are at least 3 different tobaccos making up this cigar's filler. Then you have 2 more tobaccos making up the binder and the wrapper. And that's typical. That's actually, there's probably more in here. It's just too difficult to tell from the shading differences. But these are all different. And you can see that these filler tobaccos, they don't have to look pretty because no one ever sees them. But they have the full flavor characteristics of the pretty wrapper leaves. These are just larger and grown specially to stay nice and pretty simply because you see them. That's the only difference between the wrapper and everything else, is its physical appearance. So how to choose a cigar? It's simply trial and error. You need to try as many cigars as you can. Don't go by country of origin. Don't go by, oh, I only like Connecticut's, because there are a wide variety of experiences depending on each cigar and how it's blended. It's completely up to the recipe what you get out of the cigars. You simply need to go out and experiment. And of course, First Class Cigar Humidors has a wide selection for you to start from. Go ahead and try every cigar that you can get your hands on, and you'll figure out exactly which blenders you might get a feel for, in general, which lines you might be liking. Those are the kinds of things you can judge by. For example, you might really like Padron 1964s, and some sizes might have slightly different flavors from one another. But you can't just say, oh, I only like Habano wrappers. You don't want to get into that kind of pigeonhole. As far as lighting a cigar, there are many ways to do it. Some people have rituals where they will toast the end of the cigar. You don't have to do that. You can light it any way you wish. The important thing is the cutting of the cigar. You want to find the first seam point on the little cap, which is a little circle of tobacco, and gently cut that off, either with a cutter like this, which is a guillotine, or you can use a V cutter, or you can use some cutters that have a back on it so it stops at a certain point. It really doesn't matter. It's personal preference. You just want to get it cut. You want to cut it cleanly and not so far down like I did here where the cigar will unravel. There's a short little, what's called a shoulder on the top here that I did cut off here, and that's why I was able to unravel the wrapper. But if you just cut off the first top part, it stays attached, and you can put it in your mouth and it doesn't come unraveled like I did with this. That's the entire point of the shoulder and the cap.
When you're actually ready to smoke your cigar, you do have a variety of choices on how you can light and cut it. I have here a very nice combination piece from First Class Cigar Humidors. This is not only a lighter, but it's also a cutter. So if you happen to forget your favorite cutter at home, as long as you have your lighter, in this particular unit, you have what's called a punch cutter built into the bottom. Now this is a dual action lighter, offers best of both worlds. It has a soft flame. It's a bit breezy out, and this is why the soft flame is a good option for indoor only. There you go. You can see it's got the nice normal soft flame, and that's good for slow toasting a cigar. It also has a regular torch. Might be a little bit hard to see here, but it has a normal high-speed, high-pressure jet torch coming out for any kind of windy conditions. So like I said, if you happen to forget your favorite cutter, this has what's called a punch, and it's basically just a sharpened little bit of a cylinder, and you just gently press it and twist it down into the cap of your cigar, and it removes a little flap, and it gives you a little bit of a hole. Now, how you prefer to cut your cigars is personal taste. Each method gives you a little bit different experience as far as how much draw you get, how much smoke is coming out of it, how plugged it may get. It depends on the shape and the size of the cigar, which particular method you may like. So you're simply going to have to experiment and see what works best for you. After you're done, you just simply close it, and it pops the flap out and it cleans itself out. Now to light it, obviously you light the other end of the cigar, and you can light it a number of different ways. You can use matches, of course, if you're indoors. You can use cedar spills. You can use a torch directly. You can use a soft flame if you prefer to slow toast it. In windy conditions, you may not have the option to do anything but the hard torch. If you prefer, you can directly put the flame onto the cigar if you don't want to slow toast it. Strictly personal preference. But the most important thing is you want to evenly light the cigar. You want it to be burning well all the way from the center to each of the edges. You don't want it lopsided. You want it to have a nice warm cherry going on, so when you take that first draw, you're going to get a nice full mouthful of smoke, and it's burning on its own. You can gently blow on it to check and make sure that all the spots of it are equally burning. And when you take your first puff, just keep the flame on it for the first couple times. And there you go. Now the point of smoking the cigar is to get a nice cool mouth of smoke. The most common mistake people make is to smoke too quickly, and they overheat it. They get too hot of a smoke, and that washes out all the flavors. You might be confused and not get all the flavors that you may see reviewers saying they're getting out of a cigar, and you might just taste tobacco or just smoke because you're smoking it too quickly and too warm. That cherry's too big. It's just putting off hot gas. So you want to take a nice slow draw. Take 3 or 4 seconds to draw the smoke in your mouth. Hold it there a couple seconds and let it puff out. And that's all you have to do. Do that 2 or 3 times a minute as a general rule. Again, you'll need to experiment. It depends on the exact cigar, what its sweet spot is. But you want to keep it as cool as possible and still keep it burning. And that's all you need to do. And of course, if this punch isn't right for you, here's another fantastic piece from First Class Cigar Humidors. This is a guillotine cutter. It's a massive, solid piece of metal. Rock solid. This is the heaviest guillotine I've ever seen. Must weigh a good ½ pound. And if this little punch hole isn't good enough for you, you want a normal cut, you can simply use a guillotine to snip off that top cap and give yourself a nice, normal draw hole. You can see that's putting out more smoke. Much better draw. That's why cigars were actually designed to be smoked. But again, it's personal preference. If you want to do anything else, you can. There's no rules. You just simply ratchet it a few times, clean up the tobacco. Keeps your lighters and your cutters nice and clean and ready to go. As far as ashing the cigar, these aren't like cigarettes. You don't need to keep the ash completely off the cigar. You actually want to keep as much ash on it as possible because that helps keep the cherry cooler. And cooler is better. Helps the flavors of the cigar, and that's the main point. All you want to do is when you see the ash looking like it's going to fall off and make a mess, you can tap it into the ashtray, you can roll it off gently in the ashtray, tap it on the ground, let it fall off, whatever. Again, there's no rules. You can do it any way you wish. But you don't want to do it artificially. You don't want to constantly be tapping the ash off. Number one, there's no need. It's going to overheat the cigar. Number two, you might actually tap off some of the cherry, and that's bad for performance. That will affect the burn. Keeping the ash on also keeps the burn line as even as possible. Again, it's going to vary cigar to cigar. Some cigars may only have 1/8 of an inch, and the ash might be flaky and falling off all the time. Some cigars, you might go 4 or 5 inches of solid ash before it falls off. Simply depends on the cigar. There's no way to really tell without smoking that particular size and blend to know what kind of ash you're going to get. But it doesn't really matter. You just keep it on as long as possible, and that's all you have to remember. That's really about it. Just take nice, slow draws, get cool mouthfuls of smoke, enjoy the flavors, and enjoy your cigar.